I'm Dean Foley, a proud Camillery man, and this is the Indigipreneur podcast. So to start things off, Nyunggai Warren Mundine, could you please share a bit about your background and what led you down the path of entrepreneurship and starting your own business?
It's something I was keen about as a child. I was looking at businesses I wanted to do, what sort of career I wanted to have. So I was keen about startups and that. And then also when I looked at the Indigenous space, I realised that there's a missing link there, and the missing link is economic development. And to do that, you have to do it through good commercial profit-making businesses, which really sets us up for self-determination. So those two coming together, I've been looking at this space now for 30 years, and then in the last 15 years doing my own thing.
Awesome. And tell us a bit more about your business and how did you get the idea or concept and how's it all progressing?
Well, it started out really as filling a gap, and the gap we started out doing is in the consulting space about how we work with large mining and energy industries, because energy is my background. I come out of the gas industry, about how we can get them working with Indigenous groups and also building the capacity for Indigenous groups to run their own businesses and to start being able to be competitive and commercial. So that's what we started from. We're actually going a bit further than that now. We still do a bit of consulting, but the main part of our work now is actually working with startups. So, for instance, we looked at the idea after the commodity prices went down in the mining industry of a number of Indigenous people were coming off, losing their jobs because of that downturn. So we looked at the idea of mining rehabilitation, regeneration, and because that work still had to be done, and so we set up a company working with traditional owner groups and people coming off the mining industry. So doing that, so it was filling a gap. So that's becoming really good at the moment, starting to grow. In fact, we started that 2 years ago. So having ownership and management of those type of companies. And also now we're pushing into the from that going into the construction phase, because if you can do rehab work, driving heavy machinery at a mine site, you can do it in infrastructure, building roads and stuff. So we're slowly moving through into that part, and over the next 2 years, there'll be a big growth area for us.
And what have you personally learned from running a successful business and the key fundamentals to make it successful?
Well, it's really it's about courage, I call it. So you look, I sat there and talked about it like many people. You talk about these ideas and you have this wish list of what you want to do. It's really about just do it. Just go out there and have a go. And so things I learnt, was okay. If I'm going to run a business, I have to learn how to run businesses. So I went deliberately into the private sector and worked for private sector companies, and learn a skill base about how they do things, how they do their contracting, how they operate. How do you make sure that you did some financial courses and that as well, to making sure that when I get $10, I've got to make sure I've got to put some of that money aside for tax, plus put some money aside for the growth of the company, and don't just go out and have a party. So those type of very ordinary things that business has to do. And also the other important thing is building networks. I'm at the stage now that I don't really go out looking for contracts now. It's about people coming to us and saying, okay, we heard about you, we like what you're doing, and we'd like to work with you and that. So it's about in networking is very important. So I built up over 40 years, a number of networks, political, private, business, right across the country. So and at state, territory, and federal levels, international levels. I've been to China a few times, building networks and contacts there, as well as in India and other places. So It's about how I do that and how do we turn that around into a business outcome.
And as an Indigenous entrepreneur, what's the biggest challenge you've faced, and how did you overcome it?
Well, the biggest challenge is ourselves, because it's not when people look at us, and even when we look at ourselves, we never saw ourselves as business, and yet if you're really about self-determination, you're really about building a future for your people, then it is about having business, because we know that Australia and most countries in the world, the people who pay the bills are the business community. They're the ones who hire people, give people jobs. That was one of the missing links. We always talked about employment, but you can't have employment unless you have a business that actually makes money and hires people, and that gives employment for people. So changing that mindset, because we're more community-based, this idea of profit-making and all this type of thing was not necessarily what we looked at. So breaking out of that, so it took me a while to do that, 5-6 years, and going away and studying and reading and looking at things and how that happens and that. So, and I continually do that. I'm always learning something new every day. Never think that you know everything, and you don't have to learn anything anymore. I'm always learning something. So that's important. And so that was my biggest challenge, and I think it's the biggest challenge for Indigenous people. In fact, it's really amazing how it's changed. If we're talking about business and stuff like that 15 years ago, people would have looked at you and said, well, why are Indigenous people doing this? And even Indigenous people would say that. That's not our area. But now everyone's out there. The growth of it is just amazing. We look at what the IPP policy has done and how that's grown, and there's a lot of other opportunities out there. Every time I see that the government put out a budget, every time I read the newspapers, even if it's good or bad news, there's still opportunities. Like for instance, when we did the regeneration, that was a downturn in the mining, but it was also an upturn in mining rehab, and so we took that advantage.
Yeah. And what advice would you give an aspiring Indigenous entrepreneur who is uncertain about what to do to get into business and get their idea up and going?
Well, the thing is, have confidence in your idea. Research it, kick it around, beat it with a stick. Have confidence in yourself. Don't be shy about coming forward and talking about your business and talking about your ideas and getting out there. This is one of the things I love at the moment within Indigenous business people, is that the people I meet today, so young people I meet today, are not shy about coming forward, not shy about putting their ideas out there. They're just so articulate and really good movers and groovers. Look, I look at them and say they're 10 times better than what I was at their age. And this is what we've got to do. We've got to build a people who have self-belief, confidence, achievers, and able to sell a deal. And don't be nervous about that.
And what's the difference in your mind between an entrepreneur and an employee?
Oh, there's a huge difference. An entrepreneur is a person with a vision. They can walk into any place and look around. In 5 minutes, they could pick out opportunities and things that can be done that you could turn into a business. An employee is a person who's really brought on board to do certain jobs and do certain things. That's not to say that some employees don't have that vision as well, but the entrepreneur is a different area. An entrepreneur is a person who really shakes up things and makes a massive difference. In fact, if it wasn't for the entrepreneur, we wouldn't be in the technology age that we're in, and that's across all sectors. That's across in health, in regard to surgery and medicines, in regard into engineering and in industry and infrastructure. You look at the incredible stuff that the entrepreneur has done and the visions that they have that's driven, made the world a better place.
And what's the biggest change you've noticed within the Indigenous business sector, and where do you see it progressing in the future?
I think the biggest change is that people there's self-confidence about themselves, this belief that they can move and shake and change not only their own themselves, but and benefits for themselves and family, but also for their communities and for Australia. Because if we get more Indigenous people into business and driving things, that's a better outcome for Australia. But also through these through their work, they can actually change the world.
Yeah. And talking about the world, which country or organisation do you believe is leading the charge in Indigenous entrepreneurship and economic development? And how can Australia's government and corporates learn from their success?
Look, we normally when we look at things, we look at Canada and the United States and New Zealand and stuff like that. I believe that from my conversations and talking with people and looking around the world, I reckon in the last few years Australia's gotten ahead of that market now. Really incredible policies like the Indigenous procurement policy, which I got to say is the best government policy ever created in this space, because for very little money, because they were going to give out contracts anyway, they've created an amazing marketplace. It's something over $300 million now. The predictions it'll go up to over $1 billion, but when you put in the private sector and other state and territory governments, that's going to be several $1 billion. And then you look at that's annually, and then you start looking at we going into other marketplaces like Southeast Asia, which is the largest growing economy in the world at the moment. Then that we're sitting at the cutting edge of that to be able to contribute and do some really fantastic things. So I reckon Australia is now starting to move very quickly ahead.
Definitely, and I agree. Just with the IPP, obviously it's made a massive difference, positive difference within the community, but there might be a few challenges at the moment with it actually having a positive impact on the ground level. Are you able to expand on some of the possible issues with the IPP?
Well, the biggest issue, of course, is the management of it. We've got to ensure that the company, it's going to the right companies. It's going to, the people talk about black cat cladding and things like that. We've got to ensure that it is their Indigenous businesses that are benefiting from that. Also, in the longer term, we've got to look about how that affects Indigenous employment as well, to ensure that there is a flow-down effect. Now, we have so at the top end we have commercial, profit-making businesses who are selling incredible products and doing incredible work. At the same time, at the other end, we're employing Indigenous people and building their capacities also to be in the commercial business marketplace, and also building good financial and entrepreneurial approaches.
Perfect. And is there one or three business apps or tools that have added tremendous value to you that you could share with the Indigipreneur listeners?
Oh, that's a good question, because I'm I'm an old-fashioned type guy. So I do enjoy some apps and stuff like that. But my main thing is that is the new world. Technology and the access of technology is just going to drive the next. You can't even predict what's going to be around in 5 years' time. What's happening and what's going on. I just you look at. I like disruptive thinking. I'm a great believer in disruptive thinking. So you take things that come from the side and smash through and make a big difference in that. And this is where the apps and you look at Uber, for instance, how that's been disruptive in a beneficial way. It's taken an old industry and created a whole new world of industry. And then you're starting to get a whole heap of other things that are coming out of that. The things I see, the great opportunities, is it doesn't really matter where you are living now or conducting your business. It's now a global marketplace. So you could be sitting out the back of Burke. You set up your websites, you set up your businesses, you set up your apps, and you get them out there, and you'll be surprised about where that will go. That automatically opens you up to a global marketplace.
Yeah. And so with the apps, could you recommend one or three helpful books instead for Indigenous entrepreneurs?
Books.
Hard copies.
I'll tell you, the best book I read is a thing called Why Nations Fail. And this is one of the things that it was given to me by a friend of mine, Brian Hartzer, who's the CEO of Westpac Bank. he said, Warren, you will find this fascinating, and it's by two economists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so very high, very well PhD economists, but they write in a very simple language because economics can bore you to death. And they actually go through 2,000 years of history, and they see about how you create the space, the environment for ideas to flourish. And those ideas then turn into commercial business opportunities, and they drive economies. So it's really, the book's name's Why Nations Fail, but it should be about why nations succeed. And it actually talks about the environment and the culture that you've got to create that encourages and develops thinking and challenges and people being disruptive.
I need to read that book. So thanks, Warren, for giving up your valuable time and insights and inspiring other Indigenous entrepreneurs to get into business and become successful to help themselves and help their communities.
Okay, thank you very much.
This was the Indigipreneur podcast, an Indigenous entrepreneurship and economic development podcast which aims to promote positive change within Indigenous communities.